These questions will work is I'm going to present a question, both of you to answer. I'll direct it to one of you first, and then the other is free to follow up, and we'll try to alternate who goes first. We have time to answer these. So let's start with Bjorn, since he presented first. Bjorn, what are the challenges that market participants should expect?
Well, I think the biggest challenge whenever you have a subjective test is, as Ignacio pointed out, there may be many reasons for a company being perceived to be a greater or lesser credit risk after certain events happen that have nothing to do with the alleged manipulative behavior. And so the moment we introduce subjectivity in the market, it will likely impact pricing in the sense that you now have to price in not only the risk of an event occurring, but actually also the risk of that event triggering a payout for operational or evidentiary or non-credit risk related reasons. So I think that's the greatest challenge when you try to fix something that is objective and therefore something that can be manipulated when you engineer around a very fixed rule and introduce a squishy rule that in and of itself has an effect on the market, this time on the elements that Ignacio was talking about. I think that will be a great challenge. Hopefully we'll be able to address that through some practice, in the sense that once we have had a few credit events, we all get comfortable with how the determinations committee is going to approach that and what kind of tools they will use. That might help, but at the moment, I do think that we have some greater uncertainty given both the novelty and also some of these elements and how they will be applied.
Thank you for that, Bjorn. Same question for you, Ignacio. What are the challenges that market participants should expect?
Yeah, so I think one limitation that I would like to discuss that market participants could have in making their point by focusing on CDS prices is that, of course, there's limitations to CDS data, as there is for any market evidence. We know that some of these agreements are highly tailored. They have different processes for payments and settlements. There are different definitions of credit events. There are limited data on the identity of the counterparties. So, if the market participants would want to use, CDS prices to try to break down, as Bjorn mentioned, among the different confounding factors and events that are happening at the same time, they should be aware of the limitations of the CDS data. So, they might want also to look at bond prices. And, even more importantly, another limitation of the market evidence is that, it might be contaminated by this potential strategic behavior, right? The behavior by the entities may contaminate the CDS prices as a benchmark of default. So that's why, I want to make emphasis in that, market participants should not simply focus on, this type of analysis, but also consider them in relation to, other elements of evidence, such as, business decisions.
Thank you for that. Ignacio, I'm going to ask you to respond to this question first this time. Any thoughts on the concern of some market participants about the possibility of greater subjectivity into credit determinations committees' decision-making process?
Yeah, definitely, yeah. And I think, as Bjorn mentioned, I think, time and experience will play a role. It's probably not the case that there is a roadmap, and there's a lot of uncertainty, as Bjorn mentioned, on how these things are going to be determined. The guidance is not, and it's not representative to be definitive or exhaustive. So I do agree with Bjorn's point on that, over time, after we see, a couple of cases, credit events and determinations, I think there's going to be, a clear roadmap in terms of, what's the role that different elements are going to play in the determination by the committee of, whether, serious prices, market bonds, internal communications. What's the role that each of these factors is going to play on the determination by the ISDA committee?
Thank you for that. And the same question to you, Bjorn. I'll repeat it. Any thoughts on the concern of some market participants about the possibility of greater subjectivity into credit determinations committees' decision-making process?
Yeah, I think, and I think I touched on it, but to put it more pointedly, whenever you buy a guarantee or insurance or a credit default swap or a letter of credit or some other type of instrument where one party is going to have a payout based on the lack of payment of some other party, you could see differences in terms of how those are perceived based on the certainty of payment following the occurrence of particular events. So, some instruments of those that I mentioned are more certain. You have the event happen, and then immediately, without anything more, you can receive payment. Sometimes some of these instruments will be subject to a subsequent loss determination. Credit default swaps are subject to the same, but at least we have a very good methodology to address that. But that kind of additional step will affect the pricing of the instrument and also the desirability of that instrument as compared to some others. Introducing this kind of uncertainty into the credit default swap, I think, will impact the pricing, but it will also impact desirability of the credit default swap as a protection instrument compared to other available instruments or guarantees, insurance policies, out there that a provider of credit may want to look to. Now, of course, the unique thing about the credit default swap is truly that you can sit there and hedge your obligations in a way that may be very difficult for someone who does not have access to the other instruments. So it is a very important instrument. It's a very important product. But the real question becomes, will it still be attractively priced, or will we see a widening of the spreads for a while, to at least until some more certainty is reintroduced into the market, and by how much? And I have no idea what the answer is. I just observe some of these kind of analogous questions that we always see when market participants are looking at alternatives.
Thank you, Bjorn. Now, I have a final question for the both of you. And Bjorn, don't go away, because I'm going to ask you to go first this time. Final question. Do you see further changes in the near future?
I don't think I think ISDA has grabbed onto the types of events that have been particularly irksome in the one hand, right? Because we've seen filings to that effect of behavior that was undesirable, and also in some respects are easier to address compared to other behavior also identified as irksome, which is along the lines that Ignacio described in Radio Shack, where it's very difficult to really have an easy to apply rule relating to accelerating or delaying an event at the company level that causes a payout under a credit default swap. That is, typically the kind of behavior where we do want to give the company more leeway, because it should be able to address its economic affairs in a manner that the market should just react to that. And then the problem becomes, okay, fine, if that, however, is done in collusion with somebody who has purchased credit default swaps, should that be enough to now invalidate the protection that has been purchased? And again, the answer in many circumstances should be no, because you have legitimate reasons for lenders to hedge their exposure. And so But as I noted earlier, there are other circumstances where the very same behavior becomes manipulative, and I think that what we will see is not so much changes by ISDA as much as increased scrutiny by the regulators that will look at any kind of behavior that along the lines of the narrowly tailored credit event or other engineered manipulations to the market price of credit default swaps as something that they need to address in order to ensure faith in the market. So the change will be increased focus by the regulator. The change will be producing more certainty by ISDA through their practice in the determination committee. But I don't see, at least in the near future, additional manipulative events resulting in a change to the credit definition.
And again, thank you, Bjorn. Ignacio, do you see further changes in the near future?
No, I agree with Bjorn. I think I completely agree that there has already been a very relevant change, and now it's probably time to see how it plays. And again, probably the focus. I mean, there's so much one can do in terms of defining, and there's unfortunately there's always going to be some level of ambiguity. This type of disputes are very idiosyncratic, and it's very difficult to provide a even more detailed roadmap into what would make a determination of the failure to pay. And I think, as Bjorn mentioned, that now sort of the spotlight will switch into the regulators and the specific determinations to be made by the committee. It's a committee. So yeah, I don't expect any relevant changes in terms of the definitions in the near future.